Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is part one of a 2 week series in our course East Asian Religions on religion in contemporary East Asia. This week, we're going to be looking at religion in the PRC, the People's Republic of China, and the Republic of China, aka Taiwan. And next week, we're going to be looking at Japan and Korea. This photos appear in the syllabus. I don't know if you ever wondered what they were. They depict a room in a temple in Taiwan. I took these pictures a couple of years ago when I visited there. And this is a very traditional space. It's filled with ancestor tablets where people can purchase these upon the loss of a relative, and they hope to secure a better uh, either rebirth or kind of spot in the afterlife for their ancestors uh, through this. And what I liked about this particularly is that it kind of combines this kind of traditional spiritual technology of trying to ensure a better life after death for one's ancestor with a digital technology. As you can see here, there's a touch screen where you can find where your ancestor's tablet is among all the ones in the hall. So this week we're going to have four videos. This one, which is kind of doing an overview of religion in contemporary East Asia, then one looking at this chapter we read from Mayfair Yang in this volume, Chinese Religious Life, that looks at the recent religious revival in the PRC and its tie to the liberalization of China's new market economy. Uh, then we're looking at an article that was in the Journal for Contemporary Buddhism by Julia Huang about a Taiwanese new Buddhist movement called Tzu and their tie with modern medical science, which is very interesting. Then finally, we're going to take a look at a chapter from Garrett Fisher's great book on lay Buddhism in contemporary China. Next week, we'll be looking at a few pieces on shamanism in Korea, Shinto in contemporary Japan, and Buddhism in contemporary Japan that I think should be very interesting and maybe a bit surprising for you. Okay, but let's take a look at this question about religion in contemporary East Asia. So, if you took a survey of people in East Asia today and asked what religion they were, what do you think would be the most common answers? I'll give you a minute to think about that. Okay, well, we don't have to do this just as a thought experiment because in 2010, the Pew Forum actually did conduct such a survey. And as we know from the beginning of the class, right, many people in East Asia don't consider themselves particularly religious, uh, but even though they do engage in various rituals and do participate in things that they see as traditional customs, a lot of people do say, I'm not religious. I don't belong to a particular religion. We also do know, right, from East Asia that a lot of people participate in practices from a number of different traditions, right? That there's not the same sense of belonging to one tradition and having that be your identity as there is necessarily in other parts of the world. So, because of that, we might expect a lot of people to say no religion at all. And indeed, in a lot of the countries in East Asia, that is the number one answer. If we look down here in the People's Republic of China, in Japan, in South Korea, and in North Korea, no religion or to be irreligious is the number one answer. Um, Somewhat surprisingly, for me anyway, in Vietnam and in Taiwan, the number one answer was folk religion. And I wonder what the survey looked like Obviously, the way you ask questions and the types of answers that people can choose from uh, influences the way that they answer questions. So that's kind of statistics 101 right there. Um, so we see that these irreligion and folk religion make up the number one and number two spots across East Asia. And then Buddhism, which we know is something that unifies the region, right? It came from India through the Silk Road to China, and then from China to Korea to Vietnam, and then from Korea to Japan, right? This is another thing that unifies the region. And even though Confucianism and Taoism are major forces, right, it seems that in the region and historically and their legacy today continues, it seems that people either can consider them to be not religion, and even though that they subscribe to certain aspects of Confucianism and Taoism, that they consider themselves not to be religious, or they may be part of folk religion where if you make offerings at different temples, including to Confucian or Taoist gods, that might be considered to be folk religious. Or possibly some people may have said they're Buddhist, even though they also have some aspects of those religions as well. So the top four in the region are irreligion, folk religion, Buddhism, and Christianity at kind of a distant fourth. But you see, irreligion is by far the number one answer, with almost three times the responses as the number two or three. So basically, as much as all the other ones combined. But as we know, right, even though people say that they are not religious, that doesn't mean that they don't participate in uh, types of activities that we as scholars might consider to be religious. Um, for example, in North Korea, the state ideology of Juche considers the supreme leader, right, to be a kind of living god, and there's a lot of ritual practices around being a North Korean citizen that kind of resemble what we talked about with state Shinto, where they would say it's not religious, but at the same time, because it's not optional, right? Everyone in the state has to participate in it regardless of whether they're a Christian, a Buddhist, or an atheist. And so this is one of the aspects that I would say is a trend in contemporary East Asia. Of course, not every state is like North Korea, which is totalitarian and mandates people to participate in state ideology. But that's part of being a modern citizen, right? Is to be part of the nation state and participate in kind of nation building practices. So across the region, right, we see this kind of secularization trend that we talked about in class a couple of weeks ago. And, there's a lot of secularization can mean a lot of different things. But one way people think about it is that people get less religious. But I want to emphasize that that's not necessary in secularization. But we did talk about, remember, the privatization of religion, where religion is not a state religion so much as a matter of choice, where an individual can be free to choose what religion they want to be. So it's not even right. Remember in Japan in the Tokugawa period, each family had to be registered with a particular Buddhist temple, and the Buddhists uh, kind of helped the state manage its citizens. Whereas here, right, there's a real focus on individual choice and the privatization of religion. And this may be most, um, you know, embodied in this idea that people have when they say, "Oh, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual," right? And that the spirituality is this very individualized, very interior, very private way of thinking about religious practice. And as I've mentioned, right? Lots of people who say they are not religious will pray, will participate in different religious rituals, will, but kind of at their choice, not um, because they belong to a particular community that demands these kinds of practices from them. And because of that, there's these sense of kind of multiple religious belonging, right, to a number of different communities, and doing it as people wish for their own kind of circumstances. And so, yeah, it's a different type of religious belonging in a way. However, we do see in both the People's Republic of China and Japan and other places, like I just mentioned, North Korea, that religion does remain part of the public sphere, right? Statecraft. These are two examples we've talked about in class before. Above the temple for Confucius at Chufu, his birthplace, and we see here standing in the front uh, Chinese army uh, officials, not in their military uniforms, but in their civilian clothes, but participating in a Confucian ritual, while I believe the people up above them on that platform are reading from the Analects of Confucius. So and this is celebrating Confucius's birthday. So definitely the state-sponsored Confucian ritual is a way of seeing how how religion remains part of the Chinese statecraft. On the bottom right, we see the rituals, the Shinto rituals that were used to uh, enthrone the new emperor in Japan last year. So these are just a couple of examples of how, despite being ostensibly secular states, the People's Republic of China and Japan do continue to use religious ritual in their governance. Okay, and in addition to secularization, another new religious trend that I want to emphasize is a focus on lay people and the rise of new organizations and new movements that focus on lay people. On the bottom, we see Soka Gakkai members, a Japanese new religious movement that is one of the largest religious organizations in Japan. It just started in the 1930s and really grew in the post war decades. And today, they are so popular and so large that they actually operate the third largest political party in Japan, which is part of the ruling coalition now, called Komeito. Um, so lay people are newly important in religious life, and this is something that kind of characterizes modern religion and is a big deal in modern East Asia. The second two articles we're going to look at this week specifically look at organizations that focus on lay people. And one way that lay people have become so central is through the rise of new information technologies. In the late 19th and early 20th century, this was about inexpensive print and the rise of publishing industries, which allowed the creation of inexpensive books and pamphlets, uh, and also the rise of literacy, so the public education. So all these things allowed organizations to reach out to lay people in new ways. Today, the technology is the internet. We see here the YouTube channel for the International Buddhist Society here in Richmond, BC. And you can see on there they have a number of videos. These were all released in the last week. There's an English language video about how to meditate. There's also videos released in Mandarin and Cantonese. And I don't know how big the print is on the screen you're looking at, but you can see that Cantonese video is by far the most popular, even though it was just released this week, already over 1,000 views. So this temple here in Vancouver is reaching people all over the world, particularly Chinese speakers, but also producing English language materials as well, teaching people about Buddhism. And there's particularly an interest in meditation. And this is, again, all over the world, including in East Asia. On the bottom left, you see a Japanese book called In a Flash Mindfulness. Every day, 10 seconds, mindfulness. So even in Japanese, they are using the English term mindfulness, and their way that people are teaching it there, it derives from a Buddhist practice, but it's been reinterpreted for more secular audiences, people who aren't necessarily consider themselves Buddhist but want to learn techniques that are derived from Buddhism. Similarly, the popularity of Qigong and other breathing techniques, which have relation with the Taoist practices that we've looked at for longevity and even immortality, have taken on new life in China and around the world. Okay, so I want to leave you with a couple of questions to think about for your participation mark this week. So if you could write me an email addressing these questions, as well as the ones for the subsequent videos, I'd love to give you some participation points. So the question is, what does religion look like in contemporary East Asia? How is it different from maybe earlier religious life that we've looked at this year? And what are some particular characteristics and trends of religion today? So thanks so much for your attention, and I'll see you in the next video.